Hi, dear Bitnet community. This is our regular podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest. His name is Vitalik. You probably have seen him, heard of him. He's the co-founder of Etherium. Vitalik, thank you for being here and taking your time for the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. First question I have to ask you, it's your first time in Georgia,
It
as
is.
far as I know, and how do you like it?
It's been very nice so far.
Yeah. And so Georgia has become quite popular with digital nomads. Do you think, can you imagine yourself participating or even working for a longer time here from Georgia? I know you travel a lot.
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. One of the main topics that I want to discuss with you is that so we have a lot of people that are just starting out in crypto. So they still have some of the problems they see with crypto, you know? And they kind of might not even understand why we actually need blockchain. So could you, in your own words, explain why you think blockchain is important?
Mm-hmm. So blockchains are a structure that lets you create applications that allow many different people to collaborate on different things and to do things together that involve sharing some kind of memory in a way that does not depend on there being one single server that runs the whole thing, right? So the initial application that motivated Bitcoins was, of course, Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency. And the reason why I say it requires memory is because for a currency, you have to remember who has how many units of a currency. If I have 10 Bitcoins, then the system has to remember, have I already spent those 10 Bitcoins or do I still have them? And this is fundamentally different from other kinds of applications that depend on just people sending messages to each other, for instant messaging or communication, for example, right? And one of the big shifts that we've seen in software in the last 30 years is that we've moved from software that runs on your computer, where you're just doing things by yourself, to software that involves different kinds of small-scale collaboration, large-scale collaboration, things that involve large groups of people, and where the value of the software fundamentally depends on that kind of interaction. And one of the challenges is that the easiest way to implement that kind of thing is to have one person or one company control a server that everyone else has to talk through. And this easily leads to a lot of centralization of power, right? So if you're participating in some application and you're depending on this one server to run it, then they can change the rules at any time. They can change the pricing, they can change the terms, do a lot of things. They can start excluding certain users. They can start, if it's especially something like social media, manipulating the results in a way that you can't detect, then they can just disappear. And if you build a decentralized application, then the application continues running, and whoever originally created the application cannot interfere with it, right? And really, this is how tools worked for all of human history, right? If you go back to the pre-internet era, and let's say I build a car, and then I give you the car. If 1 week later I disappear, or I decide I think that you're evil and I don't want you to have the car anymore, or whatever else, there's nothing I can do, right? Your car is yours. The internet really does not work this way, right? And there's a lot of these opportunities for just ongoing very centralized power projection. And I think this is true in social media, this is true in financial ecosystems, it's true for currency, it's true for basically anything that happens at large scale online. And blockchains are a way to do online collaboration, to build these online applications that allow large groups of people to still work together, but in a way that feels more like the way that cars worked 100 years ago instead of the way something like Google or Facebook works today.
So one of the important things that you mentioned is decentralization, right? Today's world we have a lot of different blockchains, obviously, and some of them are quite centralized, but people seem not to care too much about it because they're fast, they're cheap, and I don't know, something interesting is happening there. But for Ethereum, decentralization has been always very important, right? Can you elaborate why you think that is one of the main pillars of a fair blockchain to have to be decentralized?
I think the reason why this is like uniquely important for a blockchain is because the kinds of things that people try to build on top of blockchains, they're only really valuable if they can have some kind of long-term stability, right? So if you think about like assets, for example, right? Like most blockchain applications involve digital assets of some kinds that are valuable. And when it's not like financial assets, it's like something like identity, and identity also has long-term value. And so you really need the confidence that whatever gets built is something that will continue to be usable 5 or 10 years from now. And if you have a system that is centralized, then like it becomes very easy and becomes very attractive for whoever runs the system to just manipulate it, right? And potentially even manipulate it in ways that like capture more of the value for themselves. And that's something that makes it much harder for people to actually build those applications or people to actually like get that confidence that really supports their value, right? Like we've had digital asset ecosystems work in a centralized way, before, right? Like there's assets inside of centralized like video games. There's like trading card games where they're like, they're physical objects, and like if I give you like a trading card, like I can't take it away from you, but what I can do is I can just like issue 100,000 more, and then all of their value goes to zero. And so, we've seen these ecosystems for a long time, right? But their value is always limited. And I think a big part of why their value is limited is because like the centralization and the trust that in the operator that's involved like limits the amount of confidence that people can have in anything built on it, and that limits the amount of value that can be transacted and that can accrue, right? So I think for centralized blockchains and like centralized applications on top of blockchains just inevitably run into the same limitations.
So if you talk to somebody who is new to crypto and he just starts out, so I think like to say on a very basic level, there can be two types of people: somebody who uses the blockchain and somebody who wants to invest in crypto because numbers go up and they want to make money off it. So as a first step, and I'm not asking for financial advice, but do you ask people to actually participate in the ecosystem and try out the different applications that we have, for instance, on Ethereum or any other blockchain? Or do you say, hey, just buy Bitcoin or whatever and hold it for some time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like some combination of both, right? I mean, like crypto assets and like I think especially, like focus on crypto assets that have been around for a long time and that have like some kind of stable value and like a stable story around why they have value that has persisted for a long time. I think they're definitely something that can be fine to hold value in, as part of a diversified collection of other things. Right? The thing that I would advise against are basically, like some of these like very short-term meme coins, like things that just only launched a few months ago, right? Basically, if something did not exist last year and it looks like really hot this year, then like chances are it will go back to not existing next year, right? And so like that's like one of those things to watch out for. And then at the same time, I think there's a lot of applications of blockchains that also just don't involve just holding assets and that involve actually doing things with them, right? So like I use cryptocurrency for payments all the time. There are Ethereum-based decentralized social media platforms. So Forecaster is a big one, Lens is another big one. So I also just use and post on both of those regularly, and like those are not financial products, so like even if you don't care about the financial side, you can use them. So I definitely encourage people to like look around and explore the applications, but also like definitely like not like throw like $10,000 into them because you think it'll be $20,000 2 weeks from now. Because like usually if you do that, it just turns into $2,000 2 weeks from now.
So you just mentioned that you use decentralized social media, right, like Podcaster. So what do you think is the main advantage of using, let's say, Podcaster compared to Twitter? You also tweet, right? When you have a new blog post, you always tweet about it or some other stuff. So you use both, and which one do you prefer, and what are the advantages of decentralized ones?
Yeah. Right. So I think the really fascinating thing about, especially Farcaster, right, actually Lens too, right, is that, they are like decentralized, so they're based on a combination of blockchains and like other decentralized architectures. But like, this isn't just a theoretical thing, right? Like you can actually really see practical benefits from the decentralization. So one example of this is that you actually have a choice of different interfaces that you can use to access like either of these networks, right? So for Farcaster, for example, the company itself that built the protocol, they have a client called Warpcast, and like you can use it, and you could, if you want, just use Warpcast, and like it feels like a Twitter. It actually has some more features, like there's things like channels, and there's a few other things that are cool, but like it feels like a Twitter. But what you can also do is you can also use a client that is made by other companies, or you can even build your own client. And if you do that, then you're essentially creating, like you're using a different window to the same content, right? And so if you don't like the way that Warpcast is doing things, you can use a different client, and you can avoid whatever the problems are that you see with Warpcast, but then you're still part of the same ecosystem, you're still part of the same conversations, you're still interacting with the same people. And so it's not like, you're leaving Twitter and then you go to some different thing that's like very nice and very idealistic, but it has no users, right? Like with Farcaster, if you want to leave Warpcast, you can switch to something else, but like you're still part of the same ecosystem and you're still talking to the same users. And I think like that already is a really powerful benefit.
Awesome. So when you started working on Ethereum, right? So you were writing on a Bitcoin magazine, you were traveling around, meeting a lot of Bitcoin people, and at one point you decided that it was not enough what other blockchains were doing, you wanted to create your own. So did you envision to have applications like Farcaster at the time, and how did the vision of Ethereum change over the last 9 to 10 years?
So in the original Ethereum white paper back in 2014, there's a section that lists a lot of different applications. And I think one thing that's interesting is like how many of those applications still are really major categories today. Right, so one of them was stablecoins. We have stablecoins. One of them, I called it financial derivatives. And like that general category is like maybe half of what we call DeFi today. Decentralized exchanges, also a big part of DeFi today. Prediction markets, poly market is getting big today. Among non-financial applications, like decentralized domain name system was one that I mentioned. And we have ENS today, right? And I use it for my blog. Decentralized organizations, DAOs. So those actually exist today. So a lot of things are very similar. There's definitely differences, like NFTs as a category, I think caught me completely by surprise. Like, I just totally did not predict that people would be willing to pay $3 million for a picture of a monkey, right? And but these are things that are happening.
Yes, unfortunately, I have one too. This didn't cost 3 million, but I'm down.
I'll see what other things.
Is there something that you wrote and that's missing today that you think like you don't understand why people have not built it yet?
So I think there are some like categories that we ended up learning a lot about. So like for example, if you think about DAOs, one of the really driving visions for me at the beginning was to try to create a like mathematically provably correct governance mechanism, right? So the same way that you can have like consensus mechanisms, so like things like proof of stake, and you can make a mathematical proof that says, like as long as 2/3 of the participants are honest, it always does the correct thing. Like, could you try to do the same thing for governance mechanisms and have a mechanism where like you can actually prove that the incentives are correctly aligned, and like it actually takes people's inputs, combines them into an output that aggregates people's preferences. And I ended up discovering some pretty deep mathematical reasons why that kind of thing is, at least in the general case, impossible. Right, and so it turns out that you can't just mathematically solve politics. If we actually look at the kinds of DAOs that exist today, what I think is interesting is that in a lot of the successful ones, the governance is remarkably simple, right? Like it feels like 20% of the problem is making a good like on-chain mechanism with like the formal structure of the rules. 80% is actually the communication that people do like off-chain in order to where they talk with each other about different proposals even before they actually come on chain and they start voting. Right? So I think like really realizing the extent to which simple DAOs are very powerful, and like overcomplicating DAOs often has very limited benefits or even risks. It was like one of those things that like it took quite a while for me to really learn and appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So Ethereum has gone through some changes, right, over the years. We started as proof of work, now we're proof of stake. We have some major upgrades. Transaction fees are quite low now. Scaling was a big issue that was discussed. So when you see Ethereum today, I think there's no 100%, but where do you think we are when we can say it's like the perfect base layer for other people to build on, maybe layer 2s or applications even on Ethereum?
Yeah, so I think the really valuable property of the Ethereum base layer is that like it's actually done quite a good job of security and stability and decentralization. And like you can even actually see this on the statistics. So like there's a big misconception a lot of people have that like, proof of work is fundamentally decentralized, proof of stake is fundamentally centralized. But then if you look at the numbers, right, there's a chart that shows like Ethereum staking concentration. And so the way the statistics are is that the largest group, so pool, so about 29%, is this pool called Lido. And like you actually can't even think of Lido as being like one actor, because like Lido itself is a DAO, and then it has like 37 different like stakers inside of it. And so, like, I think if you're fair, it's like somewhere in between, like one actor and 37 actors, right? So that's, and then number 2, I think you have Coinbase, which has like around 10%, and then Kraken, which has like maybe another 10, and then it goes smaller from there. But then if you look at like Bitcoin, for example, like 2 pools that like the top 2 add up to something like 60%, right? And then if you look at what Ethereum was when Ethereum was proof of work, like the top 2 pools added up to like 70%, right? So the like, and then the other thing is like if you look at other examples, like the percentage of like nodes that are block producers that are not accepting like certain transactions, like that actually decreased from about 70% to like about 30% today, right? So there's a lot of ways in which the decentralization, the permissionlessness of Ethereum is like really actually standing the test of time and is actually improving. And a lot of different like things in the protocol that are designed so that like if the protocol gets attacked, it's difficult for the attacker, and it's very expensive for the attacker, and it's like relatively easy and practical for the defender to recover from an attack, right? So like these are things that I think the Ethereum community really puts a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of thought into, and like that really feeds into Ethereum's usefulness for all of these other like applications on top, right? Including people like using layer 1 directly, including these layer 2 protocols, including DAOs on top of layer 1, right? Like one of the things that I think is worth appreciating, right, is like Ethereum is often like a protocol for protocols, right? And if you're a protocol for protocols, then like that decentralization part becomes even more important, right? Because like if you think about like something like like encrypted messaging, for example, right? Like it's one of the reasons why it's like actually not too bad for like something like Signal to be centralized is because if Signal shuts down tomorrow, it's like not that hard to just coordinate and switch to a different one, right? There's like like 10 different like forks of Signal. There's independent versions, but blockchains are like building for long-term stability, right? And if you think about like a decentralized protocol on top of Ethereum, like decentralized protocols themselves are also slower to make quick decisions, right? And they have to be because those decentralized protocols are themselves trying to be more stable. They're trying to give their users confidence, and so because of that, like if Ethereum breaks, decentralized protocols on top, they can't just like make a snap decision and then 12 hours later they're like on top of Bitcoin or on top of Ethereum Classic or on top of Solana or whatever else, right? And so providing that stability for applications becomes even more important, right? And so I think this is one of those areas where the Ethereum layer 1 really shines, and I think it's something that the core developers value and that the core developers really make an active effort to keep improving on.
Do you predict that in the future a lot of, let's say, retail users will switch to layer 2s and will not participate on layer 1 because of different reasons? Maybe they think it's too expensive, whatever, too slow, or even though it's not anymore. Like, do you think it will happen over time?
I think in the medium term, at least, so like for the next few years, I expect like some users to be like pure layer 2 users. I think some layer 2 users will also be like some combination of layer 1 and layer 2. I mean, layer 2s definitely are much cheaper, right? And so for example, on layer 1, transaction fees are often like between 10 cents and $1, and this is like a big improvement compared to 2 or 3 years ago. But layer 2s now are under 1 cent, right? So layer 2s at this point are crazy cheap, and they're like basically ready for people to start building really mainstream applications on, right? And like there's a lot of things that you can do if you just like stay within layer 2s, right? I mean, even if you want to like move from one layer 2 to another layer 2, like there's these bridging protocols, right? Where basically, it's kind of like a decentralized exchange. Like you basically say, I have 1 ETH on Optimism, and I'm willing to sell that ETH to whoever gives me like 0.9999 ETH on Arbitrum, and then like you do this approach, and then like you don't actually do anything on layer 1, but you're still moving from Optimism to Arbitrum. And then you have like other people, like specialized liquidity providers, that actually do the trade. And then if they end up having too many coins on one side, then they actually go through layer 1 and they move coins over, right? So like that's one thing you can do. But then like I think some level of use of layer 1 is still important, right? Because like the security model of a lot of these layer 2s, it depends on the idea that like if something bad happens on a layer 2, you can still withdraw, you can exit, and you can do things on a layer 1, right? So I think like some ability to use layer 1 continues to be something that's important. So like I expect it's going to continue to be a balance.
Okay, and so to the approach, I have a question because for a lot of people it's easy to understand that, let's say there's one, right? It's a layer 1, and I can do like cheap transactions, fast transactions there, and the concept of this bridging and everything, it makes sense if you've been around the blockchain, so to speak, but for newcomers it's quite hard to understand, right? That there is this layer 1, and then you have different layer 2s that also, like you wrote in your blog, is like there are cultural differences there, and it might be interesting to have things like that. But do you think that kind of hinders people to adapt or to come to layer 2s? Because, also a lot of exchanges don't have those layer 2s implemented, right? And we still live in a time where exchanges are kind of the bridge between fiat and crypto.
So I think those difficulties are real, but I think a lot of people underestimate the extent to which those difficulties are not like something that's fundamental to a layer 2 architecture, but instead they are like user experience issues that are weaknesses of the way that a wallet UX works today, right? because like theoretically, there's no reason why you can't design a wallet where the process of sending coins with bits from one address on Optimism to another address on Optimism looks exactly the same as moving coins from one layer 2 to another layer 2, right? So like one specific thing that needs to be done is chain specific addresses, right? So like basically, like the address needs to contain, like not just like the 20 byte address that's like the location inside the chain, but it also needs to, like somehow contain the name of the chain, right? And so then if you imagine, like someone gives you an address and that address says, like 0x123 something something at optimism.eth, and then you paste that address into your wallet, like your wallet on the back end would be able to just like move the coins over, and like if you don't have coins on Optimism yet, it just does bridging automatically, and then like you as a user don't need to worry, right? And like this is like similar to like how if you think about like how transportation like works, for example, right? If you're like getting from one city to another, then you have highways between cities, you have roads inside of cities, but like as a user, you don't necessarily even have to care. You just like put it into Google Maps, and then like it just like tells you where to turn, and and then if you in a few years we'll have self-driving cars, and like like as a user you don't need to worry, right? So I think like that's the kind of path that we want to take, and like there's steps that we've already taken in that direction, right? So one example is that a big UX problem about like 1 or 2 years ago was that you as a user had to manually like switch networks when you switch to a different application that used some different layer 2, right? And like this was really annoying for people. This is a problem that basically doesn't exist anymore, right? Like I used the Rabby wallet, and for me, like I'm on one application, and then it's using Ethereum L1, and then I switch over to Polymarket, and that's using Polygon, and it just like switches the network automatically, and like I don't notice it, right? So I think in general, like we can go very far just by by doing things like that, right? By doing things that are basically inspired by like the way that the internet architecture works, the way that transportation in the physical world works, that make all of that like complexity like basically invisible to the user, and still like actually make it feel pretty indistinguishable from just being one unified ecosystem.
It's still boggles me that we still have such wallets that it's hard for the user to actually understand what he's doing. It's a terrible thing. So when you think about other blockchains, do you see them as competitors, or do you see them as something, there's this bigger goal that we have to achieve together, or do you like there's some that you probably criticize for being too centralized or not secure enough? Who do you see as a competitor, and what's your approach to that?
I mean, I think like a lot of these other chains, especially outside of the Ethereum ecosystem, like what I expect will happen is that I expect we'll continue to see them just specialize into different applications and different types of users that care about different things and different trade-offs, right? So, like if you go to like Bitcoin conferences, for example, right? Like the things that people care about are generally very different, right? And so, there's people who care about like savings and like holding money in Bitcoin, the asset. There's like people who are like trying to do like a very limited number of applications. There's also like this very obvious difference in like the cultural vibe like between Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so if you look at like those two, like to me it doesn't even feel like they're really competing for the same audience. And then like I talked to Solana people recently, and I asked like them like what kinds of applications are they most excited about. And like the answer there, the number one answer there right now is deep in, right? This decentralized physical infrastructure idea. And when I look at a lot of these deep in ideas, they're ideas that they demand a lot of scale, but they often like actually don't demand a lot of decentralization. And the reason why is because a lot of those applications, they're like actually based on like partnerships with like specific providers for distribution in order to be effective, right? And so like it actually feels like they're trying to like make very different things with different kind of trade-offs. And so yeah, like I'm expecting that we'll see a few major like clusters basically like specialize in like both different kinds of applications and then different kinds of users that care about different things.
Right. One of the main topics in the last 1 year and this year was the Bitcoin ETF, and now we also have the Ethereum ETF in the US. What's your take on that? Like, do you like that we have more people coming in, even in a different way, not directly on the blockchain, and are becoming investors in this, or do you think it's unnecessary? What's your take on it?
I mean, I think my honest opinion is so. There's this joke I heard once from a French person, which is, what's the most beautiful place to get a view of Paris? And the answer is the Tour de Montparnasse. And why is that the most beautiful place to get a view? Because that's the only place where you don't have to see the Tour de Montparnasse.
So, like ugly building, right?
Yes. And so, like I think the analogy here is that, like for me, the biggest reason why I'm really happy that the Ethereum ETFs has succeeded is because like basically we don't have to talk about the Ethereum ETF anymore, right? Because like I think it's valuable to get like more mainstream adoption and to have like crypto assets more accessible, but at the same time, it definitely feels like the sort of thing that, like, to a lot of people, it's like a crutch, right? It's like, we don't have to actually think about progressing Ethereum and making Ethereum better because, we'll just get these institutionals and, like, the pension funds will start buying in and, like, all of our cryptos will go to the moon for free. And, like, we saw, like, that the ETFs came and that actually didn't happen. And now, the only way to make, like, cryptocurrencies and blockchains more successful is to, like, actually work hard and build things. And now I think, like, that's much more clear and we can just focus on really, working hard on doing that.
Yeah. I agree. So when we have like this bull runs, right? There might be like some 3 months of meme coin mania on Solana, and people are like dogs and cats and I don't know everything coins. Do you sometimes like these are users, right? We call them vegans sometimes, but some of them stay in the ecosystem and can become actual valuable users to the ecosystem, right? Do you think that, or do you worry, maybe worry is the wrong word, but do you think this should be happening on Ethereum and some layer 2s of it, or you don't mind if it happens somewhere else and you don't want to have those users on Ethereum?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's see, I'm trying to, like the kinds of applications that I really hope to see, right, are applications that are like positive sum for the world, that are sustainable, and that like are things where if we look back at them 5 or 10 years from now, it's like they're things that continue to survive, and they're things where from like. If looking back at it, like at a point in time where it's become history, it's like obvious that like these are things that actually like helped people and contributed to people's lives instead of just being like temporary things where once they're gone, everyone hates them and everyone forgets about them. And I think a lot of people in the Ethereum ecosystem really, feel the same way, right? And like, like really wants to see applications that have long-term value. And so I think, it's like there's, like a plus and a minus side to these, to those kinds of things happening, right? Whether the plus side is like, it's always good to have experimentation, it's good to have excitement, it's good to have users, but then the other side is like there's actually benefits to taking it slow and trying to really like figure out like what is really like the right thing to do and what is the right thing for the ecosystem to be excited about and getting behind. And like I actually like that the Ethereum ecosystem is really like more discriminating in that way, like it's much more selective about the kinds of things that it is willing to get excited about. It is something that it's definitely possible to take too far, right? Like there's definitely a group of Bitcoin maximalists, for example, that tries to say that payments that store value are like the only legitimate use cases, and if you're using the blockchain for anything else, then you're a scammer. And like that viewpoint, I think, is like actually still losing even like inside of Bitcoin itself right now that you have. Like things like ordinals and like starting to have these Bitcoin layer 2 projects. So like I think there is a balance there, but I think like my hope for the Ethereum ecosystem is like we actually try to like find that balance, and we really continue to have this emphasis on like taking this principled approach and like really getting excited about things that we will still be able to feel excited about 5 or 10 years from now.
Awesome. And when we also talk about ETFs and like mass adoption, we do have so crypto is becoming more important also in elections. We have seen that in the US election where one candidate is promising us the moon basically. And do you think that first of all should crypto become a talking point in politics? And second, the regulations that we have currently in place in the US and especially in Europe, we have now the new regulation coming this year. Do you think that's more limiting crypto, or is it giving a understanding of what regulations are, which kind of could benefit us in the long run? Or how do you see the regulations that we have right now and where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the crypto space, like choosing political candidates, right? I mean, I wrote a blog post on this topic about a month ago. Like, the basic summary is that I think like it's really important to like not be short-sighted about this topic, and to really remember like the big picture of like why you want the crypto space to succeed, right? And one of the analogies I used there was like about 5 years ago, like it felt like the Russian government was like getting excited about crypto, like trying to be open to technology and open to those to the space and all of those things. But then 5 years later, like it's just obvious that like that government is like the exact opposite of freedom and openness and trying to make the world better, right? And so
this is George and I only can agree.
Yes, and yeah, so I think it's like this is like my worry, right, is that like if the community sends the message to politicians that like basically all you need to have us is to like do things that make it easier for $1 trillion to like enter and pump our coins, then like is the space really good for the world, right? So I think that's that's one of those things where like I think we want to really be cautious about. The other thing is, I mean, I think there is a lot of like genuine willingness among regulators that I've seen worldwide to actually like be open to the space and like really be open to the space for like the right kinds of philosophical reasons. And I think this is like even very true internationally, right? I mean, so like here in Georgia, like there's been lots of like interest, including from the government in various kinds of like crypto friendliness and crypto applications. I visited like Japan about a few weeks ago. There's a huge amount of interest there in things like zkID projects. There's a lot of openness to crypto itself, actually. I think the government there like, did a good job of like putting in the right rules so that the FTX situation actually caused like almost no problems for Japanese people. And so I think that actually like helps them to feel confident in being more friendly today. So I think like a lot of people in like all parts of society, like even including the government, like they like really are interested in the kinds of principles that the space is building toward, right? Like I think it's not even true that like like the space is decentralized and like the government is centralized, and therefore if you're part of the government you have to hate blockchains, right? It's like I think it's people like it's important to realize that there's like actually like people even like inside governments that don't even think that way at all, right? And even just like the concept of democracy, I think, is all about the governments trying to embrace like a certain type of decentralization and like actually give benefits like giving people like freedom and stability and confidence as a result, right? And so I think there's a big opportunity in like trying to figure out a collaborative approach. And I think there's like definitely specific areas that could really benefit from one, right? So like if you think about issuing assets, to give one example, right? So one of the problems that I see in the United States and historically is that there's this effect where basically people creating assets actually have an incentive to make their assets sound like basically as useless as possible, right? Like basically because if you tell people a clear story, this is my asset and this is the economic reasoning for why I expect, this asset will have value, and if you believe this reasoning, then you can invest. Then like if you actually like write out that argument explicitly in a transparent way, people will say you're a security, right? Like if you give any kind of clear story for why your asset might grow in value, you're a security. Now, if on the other hand you say, oh, this is a governance token, or oh, this is a meme coin, or oh, you're giving donations, then like you have plausible deniability, and you're maybe not a security, right? And like this is just like horrible. Like it's basically worse than either no regulation at all or banning the space completely, because it basically says like you're actually being harsher on good stuff than on bad stuff, right? Like you're actually creating an incentive for people to like act in ways that make themselves indistinguishable from scammers. And if you do that, then that like creates even more room for scammers, right? And so the thing that I think you need is like you need a framework that is actually like designed around the realities of like what tokens are, how tokens work, the specific challenges that we've seen with token projects and ICOs, and like really designing something that both accepts the legitimacy of the space and actually tries to go after scammers and bad actors and people making misleading claims and actually try to improve the space. And I think like if there is like even one country where both the government is interested in being cooperative and where the local crypto space is interested in being cooperative and engaging, something very positive could happen.
And do you have a role model, so to speak, of a country that you think of where you think it's most plausible that this will happen?
So countries where I think there's like starting to be this kind of positive engagement. I think Montenegro is starting to take some steps. My impression is that like in Georgia, there's like enough of a crypto interested government and enough of a crypto community that like if people try, if there's this opportunity. The UK is somewhat larger, right? And like there's definitely started to be more positive engagement there recently. Then I think in Japan, it's definitely like starting in actually like a lot of places in East and Southeast Asia. I've also been to Taiwan as well recently. Then in Argentina, of course, Milei has been very interested in crypto, in Japan, or Argentina has long had a crypto space that's like very strong for very understandable reasons to do with their currency situation.
Inflation.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think those are probably some examples of like places where something like this could happen. But I think the next stage is for things like this to really like actually start getting into the specifics much more.
So if you envision a world where we reach mass adoption of crypto and like everybody's doing something on the blockchain, how does this world look to you? Is it like, maybe better is not the right word, but like how does it feel? How does it work? What are we doing on our daily basis? Are we even understanding that we are using blockchain, or it's just embedded in our minds that this is the new financial paradigm that we're living?
I think like my hope for the AI space is for it to at least, let's say, succeed in the same way that Linux succeeded, for example, right? Like, I think Linux is this really interesting example, right? It's this like free, open source operating system. So, like anyone can download it on their computer. It's like very easy to, like hack and do things with, make your own versions of. Like I use it. And I think what's interesting about its success is how it's like it has this really strong idealistic aspect to it, right? Like open source and free software, and like all of those ideals around it that really motivate a lot of people and a lot of like really smart computer programmers. But then it's also succeeded in this like very pragmatic mainstream way that's become a very big part of the infrastructure, right? And like Linux obviously has not taken over the world, right? Like, like lots of people use iPhones, and like lots of, most computers, like laptops, like are still running Windows. And then even with Linux, like Android is built on Linux, but Android has most like actual implementations that people use have a lot of like proprietary components that end up going against like the principles, right? So it's like, very far from utopia takes over the world, but still, like it's something that's succeeded in becoming this base layer of a lot of servers that are like running big parts of the internet today. It gets used by scientific computing. It's if someone wants to, like me, like they can run it on their laptop. There's versions they can run on a phone, and it's like gotten to the point where you can use it and you can actually be interoperable with everyone else that's like still using proprietary software. And so it's like this mix where it's like actually like become this big part of internet infrastructure, and I think it's really contributed to making the internet a significantly more open and a significantly more free place as a result. And at the same time, it does create this kind of alternative ecosystem where people who really believe in those values more purely, they can continue to use it. They can continue to like even build on top of it, and like it hasn't taken over everything, but it still like I think keeps the rest of the market honest by providing an alternative. And so I think if the crypto space continues to have that level of success, like I would consider it to be extremely successful.
Very interesting. One topic that is basically the topic of the year, I would say, is AI. We did have some crypto projects that, some AI coins that were very successful, but not to go into deep there. Do you think there's an intersection between crypto and AI that goes beyond like token sales of AI startup, or do you think they're not connected at all?
So I wrote this article at the start of the year where I tried to explore the intersection there, and the kinds of categories of applications that I described that make sense are, one is AIs participating in crypto applications, right? And like that's actually like a crypto AI intersection use case that has existed for basically 10 years, right? Like it starts with arbitrage bots. And like you can do similar things with prediction markets, for example. Like there's a pilot project where you have like $10 markets, and you have AIs that just make like basic predictions across all of them. Then you could imagine things like that really expanding out further. Then another example was like using crypto technology to try to make AIs like more trustworthy in some way, right? Basically, so there's like some applications that like WorldCoin is one example, right? Like they're trying to give like a token to every human, and to do that, they have to like scan your eyes, and they need to know like is this actually a genuine person, right? And like you need an AI model to do that. But then, like the thing that they're trying to do is like actually, like see if it's possible to make this kind of thing be decentralized, right? Because like centralized versions of this exist, like everywhere, right? It's like every government ID system, right? And the challenge is like, how do you actually, like verify that a model has done, like a particular type of scan, that it actually has made a particular output? How do you verify that the model was generated in a way that it doesn't have backdoors? and like really trying to use cryptographic proofs at every step there. So like that seems like, it could be interesting, but one of the challenges there is like the overhead of the cryptography is like pretty high, right? And AI is already expensive computation. Cryptography makes it more expensive. So there's like this issue. So to me, there's like a couple of these interesting application areas. But at the same time, there's definitely, I think, a lot of people in that space who just totally don't know what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of this kind of magical thinking around what blockchains do, right? It's like, oh, you put data on the blockchain and you record things, and if you record things, you know that the data is trustworthy. But then, these are like words, right? And if you try to, turn those words into an actual argument of like, this is a specific type of attack or like abuse of the system that would be possible if it's centralized, but becomes impossible if you put this data on the blockchain, like it doesn't actually translate, right? And so I do think there's like a huge amount of hype chasing in there. There's definitely this like smaller amount of like actual really interesting stuff happening. So I think it's an interesting space to follow, but they definitely are, like different technology areas. Like I definitely don't expect, crypto AI to take over crypto or take over AI.
And do you use AI in your daily life? Do you like have one of the applications or something that you like think it changes your life and improves it, makes it easier?
Yeah, I do. So I actually have a bunch of the open source models downloaded running locally on my laptop. So I have the Llama 3s, DeepSeek Coder, then some of the image and video generating ones, and so I end up using those regularly, like sometimes to help with coding. And I think with coding, they're like the most helpful when you're trying to like learn how to code with a new framework or a new API or like some new library that you have not used before, but many other people have, right? So like one example is like about a year ago, I used GPT to just like write a simple Chrome extension for myself. Like basically, the use case was just that I wanted something where I could like mouse over a word with a foreign language and it would show me the translation. And like it just did it for me in like like not quite in one shot. It took a few shots, right? But it did it. And like if I had to figure out how to write Chrome extensions from scratch, it would have taken me hours, right? But this took me like much less time. So there's like things that it's good at from there. Then I also use it for art sometimes. So like even some of the pictures in my blog posts are. So actually the thing that I find, right, is that if you want to use AI to make art where your only goal is to impress people, then you just like put some text in and you tell the AI to draw it and it draws something and it works on the first time. But if you want to draw something where your goal is to convey a specific message that you want to convey, then like that doesn't actually work. Like you actually have to interact with the AI. You have to like actually do, like 5 or 10 rounds of like talking to the computer and saying, draw this, change this, I want this part to be done differently.